Good evening and welcome to Screentone Club. This is episode 19 of your fortnightly look at manga. We are recording on the 3rd of March 2019 for release on the 5th of March 2019. My name is Elliot Page and I am joined as always by my lovely co-host Mr. Andy Hanley. Andy, how does it feel to realise that a sixth of the year has already vanished?
Yeah, it's kind of scary, especially when you work for a company that kind of works in quarters in a very explicit way. It's like, oh, we're almost at the end of the first one of these. Like, where did that go? What happened?
Yeah, it was Christmas 5 days ago, wasn't it? What's going on? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, sometimes Christmas never ends, as I've learned this year, but that's a whole other story.
Oh God! If there was ever that's a very threatening phrase. That's all I can really say is with that. Oh Christ! The wounds from that Christmas Scrabble game will never truly fade.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because it's now March. My work has now launched into appraisal season. Well, maybe not launched, lurched. That's the better word. So,
yeah, that's usually. It's usually a thing that is stumbled into, like, oh, I guess we have to do this.
Ow, I stubbed my toe, and I'm going to get appraised. Fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So, goofing around aside, this is your fortnightly look at manga. We have picked out our previous titles for us to read, and we're going to read them, and we've read them, and now we're going to talk about them. First and foremost, we have a Patreon. If you want more manga podcast goodness, please feel free or consider chucking some money our way. Even just $1 a month will get you access to our bonus episode feed, which most recently had I think, quite good episode on Dr. Stone, a currently ongoing Shonen Jump property, which seems to have its fans, and we had quite a good back and forth with our readership about what they thought of the series. But if you want to hear what we think about it, I'm afraid you'll have to pony up a little bit of money. But all your money goes straight to the running of the podcast and the livening thereof. On that note, we do have one of our tiers in the podcast Patreon where you can get a shout out on this very show. And our one and only still returning champion shout out tier patron is Rob Jessup. Thank you very much, Rob. So moving on, we don't have any returning champions to discuss this time, unless you have anything sneakily to jump in with, Andy.
No, we don't. I mean, my main thing is I'm jonesing to make a returning champion of one of the two series we're going to talk about on this podcast, so I can guarantee we almost certainly will have one for the next show.
Yeah, same, because for one of these shows we're going to talk about, one of these series we're going to talk about today, I've already purchased volumes 2 and 3 just before this episode when recording started. So, hooray! I also want to talk more about Dr. Stone at some point, but maybe after a few weeks and I've read a bit more of it. So we'll see. Cool. Yeah, weird. But yeah, one thing to also note, as it's now March, it's now time for more new votes for what we're going to cover on our bonus episode. So you can dictate what we have to read, without much actual limitation on it, honestly. We've got a good crop of stuff currently bubbling away in the pot, and your vote can change our fate and make us read another goddamn light novel. Although I seem to keep doing that to myself anyway, so whatever. So, first and foremost, we shall move on to the series for this week. Andy, do you mind if I go with my pick first?
No, please do, because it's the one I want to talk about more, quite frankly.
Oh, blimey. Yeah, I'm with you there. I want to talk about this more, but I have more to say about the other one. Anyway, we'll get whatever. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is After Hours, a series by Yuta Nishio, published by Viz. It is a 3-volume self-contained story about, at the moment, a pair of girls who are, young adults to getting towards 30s, mid-20s, late 20s. Age, and both of them are kind of finding their feet, and it stars main characters Emmy, who is your kind of introductory character and point of view character more than anything, who is, quarter life crisis, basically, the person. She has nice hair. It's in a silly, rather infantile hairstyle. She doesn't really have a job at the moment. Her personal circumstances are kind of elided by this series because she herself is kind of running away from them a great deal, and we'll probably get to more about that later. And you also have Kay, who she meets, and she meets at a club after her friend basically stands her up, and so she ends up basically having a one-night stand with her, and two of them kind of fall into a very interesting relationship as they kind of feel each other out and also, sort of open themselves up to each other to differing degrees. And it turns into this really fascinating and like sort of very realistic, but also kind of like heartfelt tinged sort of romance / coming of age story, I suppose, in a way, where the two of them are kind of taking on one. Kay seems very, very strong and very placed in her life and what she's doing. And as you learn more about her, she seems like she has it all kind of put together, but at the same time, she's no stranger to tension and to struggle. And Emmy, who very clearly, as mentioned before, is trying to keep her life on the tracks or figure out what to do with it and where she stands with everything. And it's kind of this really fascinating sort of like very, very careful picture postcard view of these two characters' relationship as they kind of go through it. And one of the things I like about it the most, in fact, more than anything, is the way that the series is very well structured, but also it's very self-assured in that it never it doesn't feel like you're reading a manga in a way. Like it feels like you are literally watching through a porthole viewer of these characters' lives, and what you see is what you see, and it's not trying to like build up great big worldscapes and characters explain their entire raison d'etre to you, and they don't have to flagpole everything. It's a case of this is about characters' relationship and their own lives, and you see part of it, and we think you're going to be smart enough to infer the rest of it and everything else that's going on around them, because you don't actually need to know everything, and you can't know the totality of these people because they're just people getting on with their lives, which is in sharp contrast to the other series we're going to talk about later. And that's what I kind of like about it is it more than that, it feels like the touch of the real, like it feels like it has a real heartfelt, a real heartfelt edge to it where it's not trying to shock you. It's just showing you what's real and letting you enjoy that and, just be, sort of blown away by the mundane, the importance of the mundane in all this. It also does some amazing stuff with the art. The art is kind of ridiculous. Like it eschews screen tone, which is always something I'm a fan of. And it has amazing use of space and perspective more often than not. Like right within the first 5 panels, you have the first time when Kay and Emmy meet. And Emmy basically feels very alone and very small, and she is like scrunched up in the corner against the wall, and you get Kay's view looking down on her in this very small enclosed blank space, and you have Emmy looking up at Kay, who is silhouetted by the entire rest of this nightclub, and like the perspective shift there, like just side by side is an amazing way of setting these characters up and framing the action, I suppose. The action's a conversation. And so loads of amazing, really great art and like really great texture work on surfaces. You can see reflectivity and such. And it really brings together this sort of amazing look. And it even shows you Tokyo at 4 a.m., which if it's anything like, knowing what it's like, it kind of captures that, but also it gives you the like perfect eerie stillness of a colossal, massive, vibrant city that's completely asleep at 4 a.m. Always something that's fun to see. And yeah, volume 1 kind of ends in a really fascinating spot where, stuff is going on. It's not trying to set up a massive sequel hook. It's just the what you know already, and the momentum behind it is enough to propel you forward to wanting to see how this all works out. The one benefit, as I say, is that the characters aren't just sat there like staring into the camera saying, oh no, I better resolve X, Y, Z. It's more a case of, oh, you, the reader, know about the things that are going to have to be resolved at some point, and that's what propels you forward. And maybe is that also part of why you're kind of jonesing and chomping at the bit to read more of it, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly part of it. I mean, I think that part of it that really works for me, or really worked for me in this first volume, is what you said about it having a sense of the real. Like everything about this feels like something that is very absolutely kind of real people living real lives. I mean, to the point where Emmy's character is almost kind of beat for beat somebody I actually know. Like, it was kind of uncanny to see that, like, in terms of her character. Like, it's kind of interesting because so often we kind of talk about like manga and anime. We look at certain characters and say like, oh, they're a blank slate. And we kind of use that as a kind of dismissive thing of like, oh, this is not a well-written character. They're just there as kind of, a cipher for the audience or whatever. But like Emmy is kind of a blank slate character in a believable way, in that she doesn't have any kind of passion or hobby or anything that defines her in kind of a way that most people tend to. It's like, you know, if you pull a bunch of people and ask them to kind of describe me, you know, like being an anime fan would kind of like, you know, come out as one of the first things they probably say about me. But like Emmy doesn't have anything like that. But she's somebody that just gets very easily like pulled into other people's spheres and is kind of like an interesting character and kind of a likable person to hang out with because of that, because she'll just like happily go along with what other people are doing and just kind of like, you know, just feel it out and see what happens. And, you know, that's kind of like how she falls into the relationship in this series. Like you say, she's in a kind of, she's in a place where she doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life. And the one piece of drama here is that, you know, there are clearly some things that she needs to sort out in her life. She knows it. Everybody around her knows it. And she's just kind of pushing it, kicking it down the curb over and over again, because not because it's a massive drama, it's just going to be a hassle. And like, again, so many little things in this series just feel very realistic in terms of kind of relationships and how they work out. Like, you know, Kay and Emmy's whole thing, like you say, it kind of starts from a one night stand. Like, it doesn't go through any of those kind of classic sort of manga tropes of like, you know, confessions of love or misunderstandings or will they, won't they? You know, they sleep together, and as it turns out, it's like, actually, as a kind of an unspoken thing, it's just like, hey, we got on really well. Like, hey, when are we going to hang out again? Like, it's kind of, that's how relationships often work out. Like, there's no sort of formal, will you go out with me moment. You just hang out with somebody and it just kind of develops, and it just becomes this unspoken thing of just like, oh yeah, I guess we're going out now. And like, I really like the way that develops in this series. And like I say, kind of the dramatic moment that is in there is very low key. Like you say, it's not a big kind of earth shattering, like, oh no, like here's this wedge that's going to be driven between the characters. It's just this thing that kind of loiters in the background that Emmy knows that she has to deal with, but just doesn't really want to yet. And like, again, that just feels like a very kind of realistic kind of thing compared to the sort of melodrama that so many series like this would normally trade in.
Yeah, I feel like in particular, like it has real drama, not melodrama, where like the thing we're both dancing around of being the dramatic moment or the nut that will have to be cracked, I suppose, is that it's very hard to know like what's going to happen as a result. And that's what makes a series interesting, is that it could be handled in so many different ways by Emmy. And I can imagine that she like doesn't want to touch it for fear of handling it badly and having an aftershock like burst out. God, that's a mixed metaphor if I ever said one. But there is that sort of thing where she's trying to let sleeping dogs lie, but she can't do that forever. Which is really interesting wrinkle and a very mature way of handling, you know, what is like a normal lifetime relationship issue. And like you say, like the two of them kind of just fall in together, and that's cool. And, you know, you see a lot through the characters and how they sort of interrelate to each other, and even just like Kay's apartment, which you see lots in this series, and like it undergoes changes and you find out a lot about it through it. And, you know, it helps inform both, you know, Kay and Emmy's character by how they interact with the spaces they're in. Which again is a real big thing, like of how they appraise the world and how they talk to each other. And just, you know, it gets a lot, you know, I'm trying not to say this, but it gets a lot of mileage out of its environments because they are part of the people in their lives as well. It's not just like setting, school, setting, nightclub. It's no, we went to this cafe and we don't have to make a song and dance about it. We just went to a cafe, all right. And then we, you know, and it does all this stuff in just a really naturalized fashion, because it is natural, because it's real people. It's not just a manga. It's, you know, it feels, as we said, it's a lived in experience. It's real life stuff. I mean, Emmy vaguely, ever so slightly reminds me of a much less, ennui struck version of the main character of Solanin by, Inio Asano, where that main character is also like someone who is drifting. And at the start of that series, basically jacks in her job because she just says, I don't feel anything about this. And even Emmy in this, you get an amazing like section where she's walking past like, you know, the Japanese job newspaper board. And she goes, well, I guess I better pick one of these up. And you never see it reference it ever again or look at it or mention it. She just does it in this one panel. Like she picks a copy up. Does she look at it? Probably not. I would guess not. but it's an interesting part of her just like informing her emotional character. And like you say, getting swept up in things.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well. Just like, again, this is almost kind of my expectations versus reality kind of thing, is that, from looking at the synopsis and the cover of this, it's like, okay, like, one of the characters is clearly a DJ. And again, you kind of go in with this expectation from so many other series that you've read before of like, oh, it turns out that Emmy's going to be some kind of superstar DJ, or she's going to be like the best at what she does. And it's going to be this defining thing around which kind of everything within this series revolves. But actually it's not. Like, it's a thing that she does that she likes. She's all right at it. She's had some failures in the past that have clearly kind of, those wounds are still there under the surface. And like, there's a really, really nice moment in this series where she talks to Emmy about like kind of how like a previous project, DJing project she had, kind of went sour, and like, everything went south. And she kind of confesses like, I don't talk to anybody about this because like, this is still really raw for me as something that I tried to do and I thought it was all going to be great, and then it kind of all went bad, which again is just like, it's a really nice kind of commentary on the relationship between those two characters and how they've kind of become comfortable with one another. But it's also just this very relatable thing where I'm pretty sure like anybody listening to this and probably both of us have things where it's just like, yeah, I tried to do this thing and it just all went horribly wrong. And I don't talk about that with people because it was just kind of like a real failed thing, which although nobody else really knows about it, it still was like, it's a blot on my copybook, like in my own kind of personal headspace. And it's like little things like that are just so kind of relatable.
Yeah, and it all flows really well, especially like, as you mentioned, like it flows into flashback with the whole normal thing that manga does where the background behind the panels turns black, which is usually code word for, hey, check it out, flashback. But it does, the way it appraises and uses that flashback. And it even Kay says like, oh, that was a real dark time for me. And now I've accepted it and moved on, but I don't talk about it with anyone. And like you say, like there's projects or stuff I've done where I appreciate that I did it or that I did something, but I'm fully aware of it and I don't talk about it. But I carry that with me, but it also helps. Like, Kay even mentions like, oh, I eventually came back to it. I came back to DJing, and, it's something you kind of have to like swallow and move on with. Which, does it feel, now I'm talking about it, it makes me interested to see what happens in the rest of this series, to see what happens with their relationship, if it continues to develop. Because while buying the next two volumes, I read the synopses and I'm interested to see what it does with that. It's not telling you exact things, obviously, but it is a case where it's like, okay, I really want to see what this series does with this ammunition. And, and also like, I know I say it's a lot on the podcast frequently, but I'm really glad it's 3 volumes. So it's not like fucking 12 volumes of back and forth, because it doesn't need that. It just needs to tell its story, and it so far has told it very, very well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely kind of, as mentioned, like jonesing to read the rest of it to see how that all goes. And I think that the other thing that we kind of haven't mentioned in terms of the relationship between those two characters is it plays really well with kind of the age difference between them, because Emmy is like 23, I think she says. Kate is like,
I thought she was 26.
Oh, well. 26 maybe, but there's a few years difference between them, and there's just like, it's just a big enough kind of age gap that there is a difference in kind of life experiences, and even just kind of a generational thing between them, where like, Kay like owns things and has done things where Emmy's like, oh, I never really even thought about that as a thing, because she's just like that, just young enough to kind of like not recognize those things. And it plays with that part of the relationship really well, kind of again in terms of Kay's kind of life experiences, where she's kind of talking Emmy through some stuff, like when it becomes clear kind of, where what sort of some of Emmy's hang-ups are, in a way that kind of, speaks from experience of like, oh yeah, like I've been through that phase, and, here's how I came out the other side. And it also makes for some real good bits of humor where, like, I mean, Kay is wickedly mischievous. Like, one of the things I really like about her is she's really good at ribbing Emmy in just the right ways that could so easily just like turn towards being mean, but it's just that kind of like knowing prods. And sometimes it's kind of a more self-aware, just like, yeah, well, I'm just an old lady, so, don't mind me. And there's a lot of really good little jokes around that kind of between those two characters as well.
Yeah, I think Kay is a very, she's a very carefully written, like almost like she's like the ultimate blend of like impish but confident, which kind of allows her to get away with a lot, which is great. And also at the same time, Emmy is also herself, like she has enough about her to know what, she has enough about her to handle herself, but is still young. And as you say, there's a generational gap between them in lived experience. Like hell, there's an entire bit about like Kay doesn't know much about computers but uses them, and Emmy is basically like, forgive me for using this atrocious phrase, but she's a digital native. Like she knows what she's doing with computers just intrinsically, and like she does a bunch of stuff for Kay's new laptop, and it's like, here you go, and Kay's like, what? Okay, thanks, Jesus. It's that sort of thing just tossed out, just used naturally in the series, which really gives it the chops. Actually, I think you were right. I think Emmy is like 24 and Kay is 30. I know Kay is 30. That's mentioned with a bullet.
Yeah.
Which also at the same time, the older character in the relationship is still younger than I am. Ugh. Now I feel old.
Yeah, I did have that moment as well. But yeah, again, and I think like Kay's character works really well because, we start out the series basically kind of seeing it from Emmy's point of view, and kind of Kay like coming into sight as this kind of like cool customer, as it were. It just it really sells you on, especially the initial kind of attraction and kind of the initial one night stand of like, oh yeah, like she's, she is cool and confident in a way that Emmy's kind of confident enough to go along with it, but she clearly wouldn't be confident enough to initiate any of that. And it's just like, it's a really believable dynamic from the get-go of Emmy being like, oh, this is unexpected, but like, you're kind of awesome, so sure, like I'll come hang out with you. And like it plays all of those reactions through like that first chapter really well, of kind of like, from kind of being a bit kind of anxious and nervous in some places to being like, oh, okay, this is awesome, I'm totally going along with this in others. Like it all, again, it's just back to that reality. Like it plays out in a way that you can utterly believe to be happening in kind of a real life situation.
Yeah, it cuts out a lot of stuff that, it works in different ways in different series, but it cuts out a lot of the entire series as a general, cuts out a lot of the talking to the camera type thing, which is really appreciated in this when it is, hewing so close to real life experience, where it's not someone like saying stuff out loud. They don't need to say out loud at any point ever because no one talks like that.
Yeah, which is
at no point does someone say, "But we're both girls," which
yeah, yeah, you never get that trait. But like even in terms of that kind of like that point of drama that we mentioned, like even that's never a kind of spoken to cameras like, but actually I've got a problem, here it is. Like, because again, like when you're in that situation, she doesn't need to tell her best friend about that because her best friend already knows because they're best friends. Like, she's clearly kind of keeping it on the down low from Kay, so she's not going to mention it to there. So that is kind of pulled into the story in a way that feels totally kind of natural, rather than being forced, because you're basically given kind of little glimpses and little clues as to like, oh, by the way, there's also this other thing that's kind of like sat to the side that is going to be an issue at some point. But it's never kind of characters having the whole kind of exposition like, well, as you know, I have this thing going on.
Yeah, which is far more interesting in this case, like way more interesting.
Yeah.
And at the same time, her friend, kind of a problem. Not the biggest fan of her. I can definitely see how you'd be friends with her, but at the same time, wow, she's an interesting character.
Yeah. Like again, I feel like she works as a real life character because again, she's somebody you can totally see like Emmy being dragged into the orbit of, because like she's pretty self assured and very competent, just saying like, hey, yep, we're doing this, we're doing that, and Emmy just kind of gets like pulled along for the ride, and sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not, and in other ways, I guess she's good as being just like a frank friend of just like saying, no, you're screwing this up. Like you should probably do something about this. But also like, yeah, she also has her negative character points as well. Yeah. I think it's fair to say.
I think what also helps in the case of Emmy, sorry, in the case of Emmy, I almost said May. I was about to say, no, that's not right. But in Emmy's case, she gives as good as she gets, It's like she's not the simpering heroine type. She is her own character, which I feel like we've lauded this series an awful lot. And frankly, it does deserve it. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading the next 2 volumes of it. Did we have any comments about this one? I don't think we did. It's kind of, I know, I don't know how well this has been doing, but I do know that the original author tweeted in English when the third volume came out saying, thank you, thanks for reading. And it's like, yeah, cheers. Please make more.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly, I do hope that this kind of gets some love and gets picked up sort of by people, because it certainly is not a series that I'd heard kind of discussed before. And again, like you say, there's plenty of kind of Yuri manga floating around now, but a lot of it kind of ascribes to certain kind of, tropes and conventions, which are, which can be fine, and you can have good narratives around this. But like this felt like a breath of fresh air, like reading this, having read stuff like Bloom Into You, which I like, but like this just, it really kind of caught me, because it just felt so relatable on so many ways with, people I know, with myself, just with kind of the way the world works in general. And that was kind of what hooked me in. And as you mentioned, like the artwork is great and really helps to amplify that. Like, I think even the character designs they're just so good at kind of giving you a real good feel of those characters without dipping into kind of really obvious kind of, tropes of like, oh, well, this character is clumsy because they look like this character wears glasses. There's something about every character design that's just like, yeah, this is what this character should look like in this weird sort of indefinable way.
Yeah, at the same time, they're still people. So, there's times they don't look properly made up. And one thing I like about it in particular is it has this looseness with the characters where you can still tell exactly who they are, but, they can adjust the amount of detail. And it has a looseness, and this is going to be a real weird comparison, but the Konosuba anime, how that is also a series that is very loose with its character designs, but that allows it to get away with way more than you would if you were strictly hewing to the character design sheet. Like, characters pulling funny faces, warping all over the screen, that sort of lolloping dumb movement they have. And, this manga, not to the same degree or for the same comedic effect, but it keeps the characters mobile and fluid enough that it can do stuff with them. And, it's to the benefit. So it looks really nice as a result. But yeah, some of the work and just, some of the actual like paneling is fascinating, as is the artwork and backgrounds. So yeah, it's really, really good looking manga.
Indeed. So yeah, I feel like at some point I should have a but moment, but like I don't have anything bad to say about this one, which is kind of a rarity, because normally even the things we like, we manage to get a good 5-10 minutes of whinging about something, but I really can't here. Like, I really, really love this volume.
Yeah, I can't think of anything really. I just really enjoyed it. Like, I've already bought volumes 2 and 3. So Return Champions soon. Talking about Return Champions, actually, and you mentioned this series earlier. I've nearly finished reading Bloom Into You Volume 2. And I'd like to talk about that again, but I'm probably going to need to reread it again because I keep getting about halfway through and then putting it down. And yeah, that manga still, that has a lot of different, I have a lot of weird thoughts on that still. Listen to our previous episode about Bloom Into You to hear me and ah about it, I guess. But yeah, cool. So yeah, that's After Hours. As mentioned, it's available from all good digital manga stockists. I believe it's also physical, because Viz tend to just stick things out. But yeah, pick it up. I recommend it. It's really cool. It's a really good manga. Flat out. Yeah. There's no qualifiers needed. It's a good manga. There you go.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, like, even if you're somebody who's like, oh no, I don't like Yuri manga, like it's not
even really Yuri manga. It's just characters.
Exactly, like it's really not. So I'd say, yeah, like if you're put off on the fact that it's like, oh well, it's 2 girls, it's a Yuri manga. It's not like it's beyond the basis of kind of the sexuality of the main 2 characters. Like it really doesn't ascribe to any of the kind of tropes or things that maybe you don't like. So yeah, like I say, it's really refreshing. So yeah, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, like, on a final note on that part, it is frankly one of the least Yuri Goggles series I've ever read in my life. Outside of the like clear like thirst that the author has for Kay's haircut, which frankly, it's an amazing haircut.
I was going to say, well justified.
Yeah, she rocks that haircut real fucking hard. But like, there are so many ways where this series could have been like put in the lewd bucket by shoving Yuri Goggles on and going, hey, they went to an open air bath. And it's like, nah, this is just part of human experience. They went to a bath because the bath is nice and big. What the fuck do you want?
Yeah, I mean, even that was a point where it's like, oh, well, you know, I know how this works out. It's like, no, it's like, yeah, the characters are naked in the bath, but there's like nothing kind of sexualizing about that at all. It's like, no, it's just two women hanging out in a bath. Like, what did you expect? It's like, yeah, this is kind of how this should work.
Yeah, it's way good. So anyway, that's After Hours, and changing gears, I suppose. Next we have your pick, Andy, the Quintessential Quintuplets. I'm going to cede the floor to you before I gab any further. So
this is a series that I picked because I'd seen a bunch of people kind of talking about the anime adaptation that's currently airing, and that seemed to have picked up a fair amount of traction, as I guess harem romantic comedies kind of want to do, because everybody kind of loves to fight over their best girl, etc., etc. So I thought, hey, well, why not check out the source material? Because I've not actually watched any of the anime, so you know it'll be a good fresh point of view for me. But anyway, Quintessential Quintuplets is the story of a guy called Futaro Isugi, who is he's kind of a loner. He's very stuck in his ways. He is a member of a family that is really not well off. They're kind of in a bad shape financially, so he's always kind of looking to cut corners just to help make ends meet for his family. You know, he's smart. Like that's the one thing he's got going for him. Like he's for everything that's wrong with him. Like, you know, he's got brains. He runs into a character called Itsuki Nakano, who is kind of a new incoming transfer student. And of course, immediately they kind of come to blows effectively because Futaro, as mentioned, is stuck in his ways. Like, he wants to sit at his table in the canteen, like his table in inverted commas. She's already sat there, so she's like, well, what the heck? You either sit here with me or, you know, you bugger off and sit somewhere else. And it kind of turns into this whole, like, tit for tat thing where they basically both kind of, you know, just snipe at each other for a while. It escalates. In the end, the two characters kind of go their own separate ways with the assumption that, oh, well, we'll never really see each other again, so whatever. Except, of course, this is manga, so that's not what happens. Futaro gets called from his sister to say, hey, like, there's basically this rich family wants you to do some tutoring for them. And as it turns out, he has been hired to tutor not just the girl that he's just slagged off and called fat, which is never a good starting point, but also her four other sisters, because as the title suggests, they are quintuplets. Itsuki also happens to be transferring into his class just to make things even more awkward. So all of these girls have kind of transferred into his school as well. And so that's the basic premise, is he has to tutor these five girls so that they all graduate. They're all kind of not really so much. Yeah, pretty much.
In different ways, but they're all kind of jerks.
Yeah, they all have they all have their own opinions, their own lives. They very much don't want to study at the end of the day, and they're quite happy to do whatever it takes to kind of get Futaro out of their hair so that they can just carry on doing whatever they do. But obviously, Futaro needs the money, so, you know, he's gonna fight to tutor them and make them graduate no matter what, so that he gets his payout. And of course, as this volume progresses, we kind of get to see him spend more time with kind of some of the individual characters and learn a little bit more about them. He kind of finds ways to sort of start winning them over to his side and kind of find ways to actually make them care about, you know, their learning stuff via their own kind of specific interests. And so it goes on. Like, I find myself not really having too much to say about this volume because it's kind of, it's mostly pretty kind of predictable sort of harem romantic comedy fare in a lot of ways. Like, it's kind of every beat that it hits is something you've probably seen before somewhere else. Like, the only real talking point, in a sense, the only real sort of bullet point to promote it is like, oh, well, they're quintuplets, like there's 5 of them, which unfortunately kind of for me turned out to be one of the biggest issues with this volume. Like, I feel like out of everything that I read here, like the series does its best work when it's focusing on just one of the characters.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
It's kind of, delving into, what they're actually interested in, maybe how that kind of can hook into their education and what Futuro needs to do, and kind of, some of their hang-ups and et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is, like, whenever you have all 5 girls at the same time, it just kind of crowds everything out. Like, it just feels really over busy, and it just can't really focus on everything. Like, especially, as you say, because all of the characters are kind of jerks in various different ways. When you have 5 characters kind of outnumbering this one guy and all being jerks to him in different ways, it just all gets kind of a bit overbearing and a bit much. And I almost found myself kind of breathing a sigh of relief when a bunch of them just kind of went off and kind of started just ignoring Futaro, and it was just down to kind of 1 or 2 characters, because that's way more manageable and way more interesting in terms of actually getting to the bottom of kind of what their deal is. So I didn't really dislike this series, but it didn't really kind of I didn't really light a fire under me. I somebody who, especially in the early running, really liked series like kind of Nisekoi, that I think you can almost kind of have a look at a series like Nisekoi and kind of see how that works as well as it does, because it kind of starts out with 2 characters for you to kind of like hang your hat on in terms of like who is best girl in inverted commas, and then it slowly kind of filters in new characters, and that's kind of like the sort of the harem mechanism, if you like, is, you start off with a couple of characters that are kind of relatively disparate to give you somebody to kind of, put your interest behind. And then you can slowly introduce in more characters that, gives you pause for thought and like, oh, actually, I really like this character. Like, I guess I'll root for them instead, kind of thing. Whereas when you drop all of the main characters in one go, it's just too much. Like, and you don't really get a chance to kind of connect with any of the characters. Like, I mean, I had to go back just to check what the names of the characters were before this podcast, because they'd all just kind of partly fallen out of my head and partly all just kind of melded together into like, oh yeah, it's just like those girls as kind of a singular entity, which, is kind of not what the series is trying to do. Like, it's very clearly trying to divide them up into their own kind of silos, if you like.
Yeah. So, at the same time, it doesn't really work in that regard, because even though it tries to give them all their unique moe charm points, like, they're all interchangeable enough that they can masquerade as each other, which one of the characters does midway through this, and then the series is at great labours to explain this long gag over 3 pages where it's like, yes, I get it, she duped him. Yes, I get, oh my god, you're not going to end this gag, are you? Like, it's not even a gag anymore, it's just a plot point. So, but yeah. It's, when it's all 5 of them, they coalesce into a single disagreeable mass, and Futaro himself, being an absolute prick, rises to the occasion instantaneously and just affects every last one of them immediately, and like is no good at handling. Like, he can just about handle one of them on his own, or at least hold a human conversation and be a real person. But whenever more than one of them's around, he turns into a snark lord fuckface and can't even handle to be like a normal human being around any of them. So it ends up really snarling everything up. And then one of them drugs him like multiple times, basically. And like all of them have their own little, like, of course, charm point thing, but they have their own weird sort of, like, the series tries to make you care about it desperately at the end of this first volume, like just in time before you close the book, where it gives you like 1 full page of each character and like an insight into their personal dramas that are going to come up later, obviously, and their strains and why they're underperforming at school, and why like the 5 of them as an aggregate, like, are kind of reinforcing each other and nearly got booted out of their last school, which is why they had to transfer. And so it's this gnarly thing about like trying to make you give a damn about these 5 characters. And yeah, we'll get back to one thing about this, but sorry, I'll let you carry on, Andy. Because
I think that's pretty much kind of where I was heading with that. Is that, yeah, like I think just it compounds the problem that the protagonist is not really particularly likable either. Like, I feel like if he was a really nice guy that was having to deal with 5 jerks, like, at least you'd be cheering him on to be like, well, okay, like, you need the money. Like, I really hope you manage to sort this mess out somehow. But it's like, actually, I'm not really invested in either side of this kind of conflict. It's, whatever happens. And yeah, again, no matter what it kind of tried to drop at the end of this volume to try and kind of keep me on the hook, it's like, I think I'm good.
Yeah, so I have two things to say. One of which is flat. So I have two main things I want to touch on. First of which, I fucking hated this series, and I hate it. I can't understand. I mean, I can understand why people are like fawning over it and posting screen caps because it looks nicer in animated form, especially because you can get the blushes going. But I fucking hated this series in particular because the framing device it uses is so fucking insipid, pardon my language. But so it starts off, and page 1 is like shithead loser protagonist at his wedding where he's marrying one of the 5 quintuplets.
Yeah.
But because they're all vaguely because they basically are monozygotic like quintuplets, and so they were all born of the same, like they had the same genetic code, which whatever, I'm leaving that aside. Like the manga keeps using that as like in very stupid ways. But it basically sets up the fact that he's marrying one of the 5. Like he's going to marry one of the 5. This is everything. The entire series is a flashback, but it shows you the bride to be, and they all look just about interchangeable enough that you can assume that it's going to be one of the 5, but you don't know which. And I think that setup is really, really gross because it makes the entire series feel like some kind of like weird hunting journal for like this shithead harem protagonist where like no matter what he does and how much of a jerk he is and how much the characters don't want to interact with him, one of them's going to marry him unless this is some amazing swerve masterstroke. And I don't think it is, because I don't think this series has the chops for it. So it feels really gross, where it feels like you're almost like watching 5 fish in a barrel and one of them's going to get picked out and eaten. Okay, that's a bit of a weird way of putting it. But you see where I'm coming from with this, where the framing device makes the entire thing feel weirdly lurid because, not weirdly, it is lurid because one of these characters is going to end up in a relationship with this guy. And of course they'll reciprocate, blah, 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 love, blah, blah, blah. But it just sucks as a framing device because it just feels gross. And it also takes a lot of tension out of any kind because any interaction could be like some weird inciting incident for starting the fucking like Futuro Bowl or whatever. So yeah, it really sucks. I just hate the framing device. And if it had done it as a funny tossed off joke at the start and then ignored it, fine. But it keeps coming back to it. And it's like, no, this is gross. Stop.
Yeah, I've got to admit, like when that was the starting point, I thought there was going to be some kind of either fourth wall breaking or some kind of cut. It was all a dream moment and then just like slamming back to reality. But it's like, no, it actually revisits that. And it's like, I mean, I don't know, it sits in a weird place because in a way all it's doing is just acknowledging that like, hey, all of these harem shows, like the character's always going to end up with one or in a weird cases more of them. And it's like,
but it's nicer to have the ambiguity. I feel like it's a weakness of harems in general is you need to let the characters at least have some degree of freedom.
Yeah. And I think it's still like, it's more fun to play with the idea that like after all of this like the protagonists might just end up with nobody. Like that's always kind of a fun thing just to have in the barrel as a possibility, even if you know that 99% of manga are not going to end that way, that they're going to have to pick a girl, and some people are going to be annoyed about it and probably write death threats to the author because that's the terrible world we live in. But yeah, like I certainly didn't like that as a framing device. Like it felt restrictive for the series, like from the get-go. Like I didn't really think about it as being lurid, but I certainly see where you're coming from with that. But yeah, it certainly doesn't do it any favors.
Yeah, I think it's also accelerated because it just puts a massive overbearing male gaze on the whole thing. But also, the other main part is that I've been reading a series, and I'm going to do the annoying thing of comparing this to another series. So apologies, but this very directly colors my reading of this. So I've also been reading the Shonen Jump series We Never Learn, which has a lot of the same touchstones. Like main character is penniless, is trying to earn money for his family, is trying to get a free scholarship, and he's going to get the scholarship by tutoring these girls who are not idiots, but they are bad at the subjects they want to go to university for. And it too it eventually evolves into a harem style comedy where like every chapter or so he'll get into shenanigans with one of the various characters and silly hijinks will ensue. They like him to different degrees and for different reasons. And it's way more charming. Like the main character, Nariyuki is so much nicer as a character, like top to bottom. He even has vaguely the same hair. But like he is such a much nicer a character, And all the rest of the cast, although they have their own hang-ups and their own little ways they tease him and each other, they're all cooler as well. They're not a bunch of arseholes. And like the art, while Quintuplets has quite nice art and it's quite well drawn, like it's just not charming in any way, shape or form. And I just don't like it. Whereas like We Never Learn has way more interesting, funny faces and gags and good drawing and nice like action when it needs it. Whereas Quintuplets is just this overwritten. I also like the writing in Quintuplets is fucking terrible. So like this entire first volume feels like it could have been done in a chapter if it hadn't have farted about so much. And like very clearly had to try and like keep reselling you on the core conceit of it, to try and keep you on the hook, a la Marriage Thing. So yeah, I'm very sorry, but like I'm directly reading something that is in a slightly different audience and different sort of genre even, but is way better than this. Like way better in every aspect that it tries to differentiate itself with, which is really wild, frankly. And yeah, like every single thing that this series does, We Never Learn does better. Like basically, I even think the waifu bowling is way more interesting. So it's really weird. I mean, if you haven't read We Never Learn, it's on the Shonen Jump app. I highly recommend it. I'll maybe try and force Andy to read it at some point.
I've actually read the first volume or the equivalent of the first volume of that. And to be honest, like it kind of left me in the same position of like, I don't really like any of these characters or anything that's happening, and kind of just like dropped off of that as well. So I would, if somebody held a gun to my head and made me read one of the two, I'd read We Never Learn, but actually I might just let you shoot me, to be honest.
Okay. No, I was reading We Never Learn and someone said, oh yeah, you keep going, it'll get better. And I'm like, okay. And then at some point it did get me, and I can't tell you when that was, but at some point I did fall in love with it.
Unfortunately, for some weird reason, it reminded me of The World God Only Knows. And once that was in my head, then that was kind of the end of that.
Another perfect manga. What are you talking about, Andy? Again, The World God Only Knows. Also, a slightly creepy angle on things, given its fascination with dating games as a pure plot conceit. Also, way more charming than the Quintessential Quintuplets. So, what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing. Yeah, I will say, even for The World God Only Knows, like it at least has some characters who you can kind of like get behind and root for. Whereas, yeah, like at this point, Quintessential Quintuplets, it's just like I kind of wish you'd all go away to some extent. Like, yeah, maybe you should all just go and like have some weird harem just away from this manga, so that I don't have to read any more of it.
Yeah, it's trying to do, I mean, in more exact sort of problems I have with it. We mentioned before about when you get all five characters together, all five quintuplets together, it turns into a mess because loads of different plot threads keep popping off when they're all together, because characters are trying to advance individual plot lines. They're trying to advance their overall family state, which is clearly blighted in some weird way. And there's some backstory, both communally and individually, to each character and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, like, it's such a mess and it's so drawn out and every character is jumping off and popping around that it is not charming to read anyway. So yeah, I really didn't like this series. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the end of the day, like it was very much like, I mean, it's kind of does exactly what it says on the tin in a sense. Like it didn't surprise me in either positive or negative ways, because it's kind of what I anticipated it might be, but I don't know, like I was hoping it would at least kind of rise above what its initial premise seemed to be. Like as I say, as somebody who really likes, you know, stuff like Nisekoi, and like heck, back in the day, you know, I enjoyed stuff like Love Hina, which I'm sure I'd probably hate if I rewatched it now. But
man,
like,
Love Hina is fascinating to read now. I got the first omnibus in a sale. It's fascinating now, like as an architectural artifact. It's like an archaeological artifact now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The fucking Dead Sea Scrolls of Harem.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, I can get behind like a good series like this, but it's just, this is not a good series like this. So yeah, I bounced off it with a feeling of like, you know, it does look pretty good. Like I think the art style overall is good. Like the character designs are kind of weird to evaluate because, you know, being quintuplets, they have to be pretty similar, but like I think it does a reasonable job of just kind of splitting the difference of like, yeah, they all look pretty much the same, but also they look different enough to be, you know, clearly definable and discernible, unless the manga like has designs otherwise for whatever reason. So like, you know, visually I looked at like, yeah, you know, it looks pretty good, and when it feels the need to do its cheesecake moments, it does what it needs to with those. And
I don't even think the cheesecake was that good, man. There was barely any, and it wasn't very good or interesting. So.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's part of what I mean is that there wasn't too much of it. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. Like it felt like it was very much again what I'd expect to see from a kind of generic harem manga. So it was just very much kind of like on the level of exactly what I thought it might be, but I had at least hoped that it would have some kind of interesting angle or something that would catch me. But at the end of the day, a series like this kind of lives and dies by its characters and whether you relate or care about at least one of them. And the fact that I didn't kind of, meant that I didn't have a horse in the race and thus kind of the series falls flat on its face.
Yep. It's bad. And the main character doesn't even fall into boobs. So whatever. We do have one question about this series from Demel's Award, who is clearly trying to turn our podcast audience and series fans against us. Which of the girls do you want to be the bride in the series? And then has her own opinion. So Andy, which one would you pick if you had to?
I mean, probably none of them.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean, I know Demelza kind of mentioned Miku, who's, I guess. I mean, it's a weird
She's
thing.
She's also the only one to get development in so far.
I was going to say, like, yeah, that's kind of the weird part of that. Is like, I would probably, again, gun to head moment, I would probably pick Mickey, but like you say, like, she's the only one that really gets any real play in the first volume. Like, her and Yotsuba, I guess, are the only two that get kind of anything at all beyond sort of bare bones. So,
yeah, I must admit, of all the characters, I'm most interested to see anything from Yotsuba, but at the same time, I ain't going to fucking read any more of this trap.
Yeah. So. Like, I mean, she's the only one that has kind of vague sort of normal human relationships, it seems.
Oh no, she's going to be a massive wreck,
But yeah, exactly. You just know that, like, well, this probably isn't going to last. There's got to be something here.
Yeah, I have the correct answer though to this question. The little sister. There we go. Boosh. Done. True harem anime hours here. Oh dear God. But yeah, it was garbage. I just hated it deeply from page one, so that was pretty good. At one point, the cat pushed in front of me to sit between me and my tablet, and I kind of just let the cat sit there and just petted the cat for a bit. So, yeah, cat wins against manga.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, to be fair, that's probably going to win out against most manga, so,
Yeah, but the cat then started farting, so, even then I was like, well, it's still better than the series I was reading, so, oh dear, never feed your cat Felix. Right, so with that, thank you very much for listening. We're moving on to now talk about what we're going to talk about next time. So our picks for next episode. First and foremost, I'm going to pick, I'm going to mispronounce this, Shut-in Shotaro Kominami Takes on the World. This is a manga about a shut-in who leaves to the outside world. I've seen a number of people I trust the opinions of posting screenshots from it on Twitter, and I've bought the first volume for like £2 from Kobo. So why not? Let's go. It turns out also the physical version is like a one and done single shot omnibus, which is weird. But, so yeah, volume 1 of that digitally. Cool. And Andy, how about you?
Yeah, so given that I've seen a lot of people, a lot of surprising positivity around the live action adaptation of Battle Angel Alita, which I have never read, I figured I'd pick the first one of Battle Angel Alita to see what that's all about. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I haven't read it in a long time, so maybe my opinion will have changed. But we shall see. I also have that from a Humble Bundle anyway. So hey, easy. So thank you very much for listening. You can find more or previous episodes of the podcast on our website, Screentone.club. Can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, yada yada. You know the drill. If you like the podcast, please consider maybe telling a friend, tweet about it. That stuff is really, really helpful for getting the word out there. If you're not already, consider becoming a patron. That stuff really helps, and really helps goose us. We are halfway to our goal of then now putting out 2 bonus episodes a month, which we already have great ideas for. So we're kind of chomping at the bit to do that. We just kind of need the push behind us, frankly. If you are on a podcatcher service, please consider leaving a review. Again, it really helps. If you want to yell at us for being massive shills, you can at our Twitter feed at Screentone Club, which has now been unbanned for some bastard reason. I don't even know why I got banned in the first place. Bloody hell, Twitter. Putting me on blast for a 2014 tweet.
You can also email us at show@screentone.club if you fancy the old email. You want to stick some emoji in there or something? I don't know. And personally, my name is Elliot Page. You can find me at Elliot Page on Twitter. Still lots of cat pictures. Also now thinking about Final Fantasy VIII again. So God knows why. And Andy, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Andy Hanley, and you can find me complaining about football referees at Hannah's 1979.
Ah, yes, the great game. Not the football, the referee complaining. Oh, God. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and good night.
Bye, everyone.